Hello and welcome to the Dreary Midnight Podcast. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, they.
Hi, my name is Celeste. My pronouns are she, her.
And tonight we're talking about the Bell Witch. Couple of admin stuff. We are doing Attack on a Queen for Patreon. So we'll be recording that this week, and that'll be next week's Patreon bonus content. So if you want to do that, sign up for Patreon. Patreon.com/drearymidnight. So, with all that said, what do you know about the Bell Witch?
I know that I don't know the exact years, but at some point I'm going to guess colonial or maybe before that, Pilgrim, who knows. There was a witch allegedly harassing a man, I think his name was John Bell. And it was like their neighbor who he had a grudge with, but I don't know how factual. And I don't know everything, so I'm looking forward to learning.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. Theme song music.
Theme song music.
That should be the new theme song. The Bell Witch was mostly haunting 1817 to 1820.
Ooh.
So
it was after the colonial times.
Yeah.
My bad.
Well, still kind of, because Tennessee was like a new-ish territory. They were in sort of western Tennessee. John Bell got married to Lucy Bell in 1782. He was 32. She was either 12 or 17.
Oh, I'll both are bad, but I hope it was 17.
Me too. They had kids, a lot of kids. And,
poor Lucy.
Yeah. So they had Jesse, they had John Jr., Drury, Benjamin, Esther, Zadok, Betsy, Richard Williams, and Joel Egbert.
Sorry, did you say one of them was named Dreary?
Drury.
Oh, Drury.
They call him Drew a lot, so I assume that's closer to how it's pronounced.
Got it.
But
I was gonna say that's a cool name.
Yeah, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 children. 9 children total.
I wonder if they were like back to back.
So I wrote down all of their birth dates, and it's like it's every year or two, or every other year.
Oh, poor
rather.
Lucy does not get a break.
But a lot of what we have is based on a narrative from Richard Williams, who was the second youngest, who was 6-ish at the time that it started. So dubious on accuracy, but closer accuracy than the other records we have, which was from Martin Van Buren Ingram, who talked to like people's cousins or friends, or like he talked to one of the enslaved person's wife's little sister who was like 80 something when he talked to her, because he was interviewing in the 1790s. Okay. So that's a ways away.
Okay.
But anyway, so 1805, John Bell bought the land in Tennessee. By that point, the local indigenous folks had mostly been driven out, but there were still burial grounds around. Nations like the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Choctaw had descended from the peoples that had been there previously. Everything was fine for 12 years because they bought the land in 1805, and stuff started kicking off in 1817. So it initially started off with like this weird knocking on walls, like just on the walls of the house. And John Bell saw this weird bird when he was out on the farmland, because he had like 1,000 acres.
Did he describe what the bird looked like?
Apparently it looked like a large turkey, but then it started flying and it was way too big to be a turkey.
Okay.
Apparently, just from Wikipedia, there are some Choctaw myths that are connected to like a thunderbird concept.
Yeah. But
that's like the only local mythology thing I could find.
Native mythology is so interesting
It's so
to me.
cool. Yeah. But this is just from with Wikipedia. In Choctaw mythology, there were two huge birds, Hiloha for thunder and Melatha for lightning. They were responsible for the dramatic thunderstorms. Hiloha would lay her giant eggs in the clouds, and they would rumble as they rolled around atop the clouds. Despite his size, her mate Melatha was extremely fast and left a trail of sparks that streaked across the sky. John Bell didn't talk about any sparks, but that was the only potential mythological thing. But according to Richard Williams Bell, who was again second youngest, was apparently there was also this very weird dog. So this is from Our Family Trouble, which is what he wrote in like the 1840s.
Okay.
It appeared to Dean, he said, Dean was one of the enslaved people, in the form of a dog, and sometimes had two heads and other times had no heads.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah. He goes on to say the enslaved people would stand around Dean, with eyes and mouths wide open to hear his description of the witch, his encounters, and hairbreadth escapes. He always carried his axe and a witch ball made by his wife, according to Uncle Zeke's directions, to keep the witch from harming him. He came up one morning, however, rather worsted, with his head badly bruised and bloody, and was always declared that the witch inflicted the wound with a stick. Dean's stories are not to be quoted as altogether reliable. He was allowed a wide range for his vivid imagination, but also Richard Williams was descended from an enslaver and contributed to that, so
I don't know. It's hard to say. With supernatural stuff, it's hard to say, like, what's accurate and what's, like, gaslighting and what's...
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. There was a lot of time where Dean was on the road alone, so there's probably a lot of chance for him to be accosted by something, because his wife was also named Kate, and she was enslaved at a different plantation, and so he
would visit her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's only traveling alone after dark, so, you know.
If you believe that there are things in the forests, then you could believe that Dean really did see things.
Well, apparently John Bell also saw the dog.
Oh.
So that adds more credence to it. But when he shot at it, it vanished, and there was no sign of a blood or a body later on.
Did he see it with one head? Or two? Or 0?
I'm not sure. I didn't write that down.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but more sporadic stuff started happening in 1818, spring of 1818, because like, all the animal stuff was fall of 1817.
Okay.
There was a lot of weird knocking on the door and scratching on the walls, and just sounds that hadn't happened before. Not all 9 kids were living at home. So like Benjamin had died in his youth.
Oh, no.
Jesse, the eldest, I think had already gotten married and had moved out.
Well, if they get married at 12, then...
Yeah. And Zadok was about to get married, I think. So apparently there was a story where there was a sound that commenced in our room, like a rat gnawing vigorously on the bedpost. This is Richard and Joel's room.
Okay.
They were the youngest. They shared the room. And John and Drew, number 2 and 3, got up to kill the rat. But the moment they were out of the bed, the noise ceased. They examined the bedstead, but discovered no marks made by a rat. And as soon as they returned to bed, the noise commenced again, and thus it continued until late hour or sometime after midnight. And we were all up half a dozen times or more, searching the room all over, every nook and corner for the rat, turning over everything, could find nothing, not even a crevice by which a rat could possibly enter. And it kept up for like a week or so, and kept overhauling the room and seeing what was going on. And after a certain
there was
point,
no like mouse droppings or any other sign of a rat, basically.
Apparently not. Yeah. And then finally, when we would search for the rat in our room, the same noise would appear in her sister Elizabeth's chamber, Betsy, disturbing her and arousing all the family, and so continued going from room to room, stopping when we were all up and commencing again as soon as we returned to bed, and was so exceedingly annoying that no one could sleep. After a while, the noise was accompanied by a scratching sound, like a dog clawing on the floor, and increased in force until it became evidently too strong for a rat. Then every room in the house was torn up, the furniture, beds, and clothing carefully examined, and still nothing irregular could be found, nor was there a hole or crevice, and so on.
That's
Yeah.
weird.
It's very weird.
So at this point, were they thinking, like, Is this in the midst of all the witchery? Were they already thinking like this is a witch, or were they
So
just
this
like
is
what the
like
heck is going on?
Yeah, so this is when things are kicking off. So it's sort of like the first couple times you're like, okay, maybe it's a rat, but it's getting to the point where it's too consistent to be a rat or a dog or something. So the other voices and stuff hadn't happened yet, but they were about to.
Let's get into that.
Yeah. But, so it didn't let them go to bed until basically between 1 and 3 a.m. Some new performance was added nearly every night, and it troubled Betsy more than anybody else. Occasionally, the sound was like heavy stones falling on the floor, then like trace chains dragging and chairs falling over.
Did the parents hear any of this, or was it just the children?
I think the parents probably heard it too, or at least they heard the kids yelling about it because... So the family had all retired early. I had just fallen into a sweet doze when I felt my hair beginning to twist, then a sudden jerk. It felt as if the top of my head had been taken off. Immediately, Joel yelled out in a great fright, and next Elizabeth was screaming in her room. And even after that, something was continuously pulling at her hair after she retired to bed. The transaction frightened us so badly that father and mother remained up nearly all night. After this, the main feature in the phenomenon was that of pulling the cover off the beds as fast as we could replace it, and also continuing other demonstrations.
Wow.
They couldn't find anything. Like, they called in other stuff. Eventually got to the point where it was hitting Betsy hard enough to leave a mark, like several times,
Poor
in several nights.
Yeah. What was the age order? How old was Betsy in this? Or like...
At that point...
She wasn't the youngest.
She was not. So Joel Egbert was the youngest.
She was the youngest girl, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
So she was born either in 1805 or 1806, so she was like 11 or 12 when it started. Probably 12 or 13 when she started getting hit and stuff. But yeah, so she was the youngest girl. Richard Williams, who was the one who wrote Our Family Trouble, when it kicked off, he was 6. By that point, he was around 7. And then Joel Egbert shared a room with Richard Williams, and he was 4 in 1817. So he was born in 1813.
You know what? I was going to say earlier that, like, can we trust the account of a 6-year-old? Because what do we remember when we were 6? But if this is something that's, like, dramatic...
Yeah.
Then you would probably remember it in vivid detail.
Yeah. And from what I recall, he was writing it up in like the 1840s. And
truck passing
by. So he was writing it up in the 1840s, and apparently he talked to Betsy quite a bit during when he was writing it up.
And she was older, so she would have remembered
So she was
more.
like 5 or 6 years older than him, and it seemed to have targeted her a whole lot. And so after it started hitting her, it happened several times, like several nights, and she went to like Jesse's house. Jesse is like the oldest who had already moved out, but in the area. Went to other neighbors' houses, spent the night over there, and it kept happening.
Oh, like it followed her?
Yeah.
Okay. Was she sharing a room with anybody else? Or were all the kids kind of in the same room?
So Richard Williams and Joel Egbert shared a room. John Jr. and Drew shared a room.
That's a big house.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like it came with like 3 or 4 bedrooms already, and then they added an extension, so it's like a capital L.
Got it.
So plenty of rooms for everybody. I don't know if Esther and Elizabeth ever shared a room, but Esther, I think, got married and moved out over the course of this. Like by 1820 or so, she had moved out and gotten married. Esther didn't report too much. So, and then Jesse had moved. Jesse had already moved out, and then Zadok was also almost getting ready to move out.
So Betsy pretty much had her own room,
basically,
because all the other older siblings were like moving out or moved out already.
Yeah.
Okay. Poor Betsy.
Well, so Jesse moved out, and then the next 2 oldest were sharing a room.
Oh, I see.
So, yeah. Anyway, and eventually, the witch became intelligent. If you asked questions, usually based on like numbers, it would knock on the wall with the correct number. So the example they gave is if they asked how many horses are in the barn, if there were 5 horses, it would 5 knocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were these... I'm asking you like as if you were there, but do you know if these were like happening walls that were inside the house, or could it be somebody outside tapping?
That's a good question, because I think the reports were mostly everybody was inside and just knocking on the outside. But that is a good question. But they always say, like, everybody was accounted for. I was going to put
Those
this later.
neighbor kids. No, okay.
Well, I put this later, but one of the theories was ventriloquism, which is a very...
Well, let's get into that after.
Yeah, let's get into it a little bit later, because it's...
But that is a good...
Yeah.
Ooh. Ventriloquism equals witchcraft in those days.
Clearly, yeah. So eventually got a voice that said its name was Kate. There are several Kates. Sometimes it said it was Kate Batts, who was local eccentric, who, as
what
we
a
noted,
name.
yeah, who had to. She was the one who had some sort of raw business deal with John Bell. But, like, real life Kate Batts wasn't one to hold as strong of a grudge as which Kate Batts did. Like, she was going to be vocally annoyed about it, sure, but, like,
so it wasn't like this. They hated each other.
Yeah.
And
no,
all
it's not
that.
like this long-term animosity that boiled over. And they kept asking what the spirit was, why it's here, all of that. And the answers varied. Sometimes it said it was a spirit looking for a lost tooth. They apparently, like 4 or 5 years prior, when they were out farming, some of the sons had dislodged a burial mound, an indigenous burial mound, and found jawbone and sifted and like had somehow buried it under the house, sifted through where they had buried it.
Just boy things.
Yeah, hashtag just boy things.
Oh
But so they
find a
sifted
jawbone buried underneath your house.
So they dug the jawbone up, sifted through the dirt under the house just to see if they could find the tooth.
Mm-hmm.
Went out to just rebury the jawbone roughly where they found it. Nothing changed. They say spirit, what's the deal? And the spirit basically said it was to fool old Jack and to mess with him. And old Jack is what it called John Bell Sr.
Bell. Yeah. They had weird nicknames.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess that's opposed to young John, because there's John Jr., who still lived at home at the time.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And so a lot of people started to say that this whole deal was a ploy for attention or money, because a lot of people were coming over to see what the deal was. But the Bells housed and fed all of these visitors who were coming to test and refused all of the payment.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the opposite of what they were being accused of.
Yeah.
Martin Van Buren Ingram in the Red Book suggested the theory about ventriloquism. And he said, this is another long quote, "The want of some satisfactory explanation or the failure of all investigations to throw light on the witch mystery gave rise to a speculative idea that John and Drew Bell had learned ventriloquism and some subtle art while on trips to New Orleans, and taught the same to their young sister Betsy for the purpose of attracting and making money. This conjecture was widely circulated and checked many people in their purpose of visiting the scene of the excitement. Notwithstanding this explanation was accepted by many, it was the silliest of all solutions attempted. If the parties were able to perform such wonders, they only had to make the fact known and to have reaped a fortune. But to the contrary, they tried to keep it a secret, and when known, it brought both suffering and loss to the family." So,
that's true. If they had picked up ventriloquism, they could have used that as like a way to make money instead of concocting this whole scheme.
Yeah. They were farmers, and John Jr. and Drew would usually build a flatboat and take it down to New Orleans to sell everything out, and then sold the last of the boat for scrap and then traveled back, which could take months.
Yeah.
But also the voices could be ventriloquism, but knocking and sheet pulling and hair pulling and hitting can't exactly be faked.
Exactly.
And
I get the skepticism, because you remember those like girls that could apparently talk to spirits, and they would
the Fox
rapping.
sisters?
Yeah. Like they would do the knocking or whatever, but then it turns out that they could just like
they could make their knees crack or something like that. Yeah.
So I get the
I can do that too,
skepticism.
unfortunately. But that was because of a leg injury.
But are you making millions off of it?
I am not, unfortunately. If only I were born in 1817.
If only. Yeah, then you'd have the king over to pay you a visit.
Yeah.
So I get the skepticism, but yeah, you're right. The other things that aren't the voice or the knocking, that would be very hard to explain away.
Yeah. Also, at this point, Betsy was starting to date and was seeing someone named Joshua Gardner. And the witch kept trying to break them up. And
what a petty witch.
Hey. But like Martin Van Buren Ingram, I don't know why I kept saying his name the entire way through, but oh my god, that's a great name.
That's why you said it the whole way through.
But apparently so Ingram got an interview with like a neighbor / friend who again was in her 80s but was kind of a contemporary of Betsy, and the friend said that Betsy was like genuinely into him. So if it was Betsy doing the ventriloquism, why would she
do that? If it was like her trying to be like, I don't want to date you. Oh no, this witch is harassing us. But if she was like really into him, then she wouldn't self-sabotage like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did the witch try to break them up?
Basically, anytime she was around, the witch would basically yell at her to break up.
Oh my god. Okay,
I didn't write
annoying.
down exactly what happened, but yeah, they were trying to.
I don't know if you're going to get into this, but were there any other theories as to who this witch could have been if not Kate Batts?
So one is that it could have been Richard Powell, who was Betsy's former school teacher. And in 1824, he got married to Betsy.
Oh, how old was he? Do I even want to know?
I didn't write it down. I think he was in his 30s by that point. And she, having been born in, let's call it just 1805, was 19.
It's a better age gap than her mother.
At least she's in the age of majority.
That's what I'm saying.
But, like, and so apparently Betsy was, like, the local pretty girl. Basically, like... But one of the books I was reading was like allegedly an account from Richard Powell's perspective. And apparently he was noting how pretty she was when she was like 14, 15.
Oh, God.
And younger. And that just makes it weird.
Yeah. Okay, so basically the theory is that Richard wanted Betsy to himself and so made sure that she was unmarriageable to other people so that he could have her.
That's the theory, at least when it comes to the Joshua Gardner situations. But yeah, it's icky. And his wife conveniently died in 1821, about the time that Betsy broke off her engagement with Joshua Gardner.
Okay. You've talked before about a husband who had wives who conveniently died.
Yeah.
That was Zola?
Yeah. Greenbrier Ghost.
So I don't necessarily trust wives that conveniently die.
Yeah. Apparently she did have some latent health conditions, and she was like 18 years older than Richard, the first wife.
Oh.
So, yeah. So it's weird, but not as weird as him going after like a 15-year-old.
Well, that's the thing too. Now I'm thinking, like, was he young when she? Because
yeah. So he was probably on the younger side when they got married, but yeah. So the wildest aspect of it was how she contributed to the death of John Bell Sr.
The witch?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So far, from what I thought the harassment was mostly targeted at John. Yeah. However, it seems that the harassment is mostly targeted at the children.
So far, because it was Richard Williams Bell's initial perspective, he got into a lot of the kid stuff. But from what I understand, it's sort of the main culprits, adding up to about 90% of the hauntings, were for Betsy and John Sr. combined. And then the final 10% was everybody else.
Okay.
With 5 of that percent being, apparently the witch really, really liked Lucy, the mom. Oh. When apparently Lucy was really sick, she would like bring her hazelnuts and grapes.
Aww.
I don't know what the healing properties of either of those are, but
it's probably better than whatever the heck they were using.
That's true. And it's also like, if you can summon grapes from the great beyond,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you? You know?
The thing with witches, or people who get called quote unquote witches, is that they seem to have knowledge
Yeah.
of herbs
Yeah.
that other people probably would scoff at, but
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
they know their stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, she could also she was also known for bilocation. So like there was one time where there were two sermons being preached 13 miles opposite of one another. Like there's 13 miles between them, and the preachers apparently, like, the Bell House was the place to be, and everyone was hanging out there one day, like that same Sunday, and she quoted one of the preacher's entire sermon, and then quoted the other preacher's
Oh my
entire sermon
God.
word for word.
Okay, this is just this is not something that can just be explained away.
Yeah, yeah. But death of John Bell Sr., which is also very wild. So he had a lot of health stuff, starting with weird tongue swelling, and RAP my search history, trying to figure out what
Yeah,
else could be.
WebMD must have had a
yeah, field day. But the only thing suggested that it had more than one consistent symptom, and this was actually heard in a different YouTube video, but potentially arsenic poisoning, if not a witch.
arsenic. Okay, well,
Yeah,
first
I
of
don't
all,
know how. They didn't say much beyond how one would get arsenic into the house and consume enough over 3 years to get poisoned by it.
Fun
But
fact.
yeah.
And this is not necessarily a tangent, but it might explain. So, have you been to the apothecary
Yeah.
museum?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how they had those poison bottles?
Oh, yeah.
The poison bottles had little bumps on them. That way, if you
if you
you
couldn't
know,
read.
if you if you're like, yeah, if it's like nighttime and you need medicine and you can't see exactly what you're grabbing, the poison bottles have bumps on them so that you
Yeah.
know that's poison. Don't
Yeah.
drink that. But people would use small doses of poison, small amounts of poison in like cold or, herbal remedies. So I wonder if they were like using arsenic that they already had, or if
Maybe.
it just wasn't something to rouse suspicion because they
Yeah.
did use poison
Yeah.
in the
maybe.
1800s.
Maybe. All right, but the symptoms had Father continued to suffer with spells, as I had already described, the jerking and twitching of his face,
Oh,
the
God.
swelling of his tongue, fearfully distorting his whole physiognomy, which is a wild word to say. The spells would last from 1 to 2 days, and after passing off, he would be up and about his business, apparently in strong, robust health.
Huh.
As time advanced, the spells grew more frequent and severe, and there was no periodical time for their return. And along toward the last, they stayed with him all the time, especially when he left the house, going with him wherever he went.
Does arsenic poisoning like let you bounce back like that?
I don't know. And then in about the middle of October of 1820, John Sr. had a very severe attack, which kept him confined to the house for 6 to 8 days. The witch cursed and raved like a maniac and ceased not from troubling him, says Richard Williams. However, he temporarily overcame it and was soon able to go out, but not far, and took another week to recuperate. And then he went out to the hog pen just to give some directions about how to do the hogs. We had not gone far before one of his shoes was jerked off. Richard replaced the shoe, drew the strings tight, double knotted it, went a few more steps. The other shoe flies
oh
off.
my God.
And again, double knots it, super tight, all that sort of thing. In no way, and Richard says, in no way I could tie them would they hold, notwithstanding his shoes fitted close and were a little hard to put on, and we were walking over a smooth, dry road. So, like, there's no other reason they would have been falling
What a
off.
wild time to be alive.
What a time to be alive.
If you grow up believing in spirits and witches and stuff, then that might seem kind of mundane.
Yeah.
If we saw that nowadays, we'd be like,
What
the heck is
What-
going on?
What is happening? But yeah, no, it's So that was in October of 1820. And
when did the harassment start again? Like in the very beginning? What was
the very first weird things were like fall of 1817, summer into fall.
Oh, wow. So it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been 3-ish years by that point. And so John Bell dies in December of 1820.
Oh.
So the crisis came on the morning of December 19th, Richard William writes. Father, sick as he was, had not up to this time failed to awake at his regular hour, according to his long custom, and arouse the family. So, like, he's sleeping in very strangely.
Yeah. He usually wakes up at like 6 a.m. and
Or
he's
whatever.
always wakes up at
Everyone
6 a.m.
knows, like, he's up before dawn, and he does this, and he does this, and
Yeah.
he does this. And
Even
he
if
had,
he's sick.
and he had done none of it.
God.
Yeah, and so that morning he appeared to be sleeping so soundly, Mother quietly slipped out of the room to superintend breakfast, while brothers John and Drew looked after the farm hands and feeding the stock, and would not allow him to be disturbed until after breakfast. Noticing then that he was sleeping unnaturally, it was thought best to awaken him, when it was discovered that he was in a deep stupor, and could not be aroused to any sensibility.
Oh, no.
Brother John attended to giving him medicine, and went immediately to the cupboard, where he had carefully put away the medicines prescribed for him. But instead, he found a smoky-looking vial, which was about 1/3 full of dark-colored liquid. John Jr. set up an inquiry at once to know who had moved the medicine, and no one had touched it. Neither could anyone on the place give any account of the vial. Dr. George Hobson of Port Royal was sent for in great haste and soon arrived. Also, neighbors John Johnson, Alex Gunn, and Frank Miles arrived early and were there when the vial was found. Kate the witch, in the meantime, broke out with joyous exultation, exclaiming, "It's useless for you to try to relieve old Jack. I've got him this time. He will never get up from that bed again."
What? So this witch is just hanging around their house,
Watching over everything.
like being a radio commentator or whatever.
At this point, that is her habit.
Oh my God.
Kate was then asked about the vial of medicine found in the cupboard, and she replied, "I put it there and gave old Jack a big dose of it last night while he was asleep, which fixed him."
Fixed him.
Yeah. If this weren't 1820, I would think she was like a 1923 gangster or something.
Maybe she's a time traveler.
Maybe. She's a spirit, so, you know.
Swimming with the fishes now.
John certainly is. This was all the information that could be drawn from the witch or any other source concerning the vial of medicine. Certain it was that no member of the family ever saw it before or could tell anything about it. In fact, no vial and no medicine of any kind had been brought to the house by anyone except by Dr. Hobson, and then it was handled carefully. The doctor, upon arrival, examined the vial and said that he did not leave it and could not tell what it contained. It was then suggested that the contents be tested on something.
A rat.
Cat.
I hope not a person. A cat?
So,
No.
content warning for cat harm.
Yeah, serious.
Alex Gunn caught a cat, and Brother John ran a straw into the vial and drew it through the cat's mouth, wiping the straw on the tongue. The cat jumped and whirled over a few times, stretched out, kicked, and died very quick.
No, poor cat. Why didn't they? Not that I hate rats, but like, why didn't they use a rat?
Well,
I guess at that time cats were kind of like not seen as household pets.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that makes sense.
It's a farmhouse at this point. Like, they had probably brought in a couple of extra cats to rule out the idea of extra rats.
Yeah.
All right. So John Sr. kept doing not great. The doctor said he could detect something on his breath that smelled very much like the contents of the vial that had been examined.
Oh.
How father could have gotten it was a mystery that could not be explained in any other way except that testified by the witch. The vial and contents were thrown into the fire, and instantly a blue blaze shot up in the chimney like a flash of powder. Father never revived or returned to consciousness for a single moment. He lingered along the day and night, and gradually wearing away, and on the morning of December 20th, 1820, he breathed his last. Kate was around during this time, indulging in wild exultations and derisive songs.
Read the room, Kate.
Well, she basically caused this.
I know, but
Yeah.
for what reason? What did John ever do to her?
I don't know. Maybe it is Kate Batts. But then Kate Batts, I don't know. Like regular Kate Batts wouldn't necessarily have the wherewithal to do that.
Or
you know?
would she?
She was the kind of person who couldn't read a room, from what I read. Apparently she like kept trying to set her very awkward sons up with people who were very disinterested. Like that's the kind of person she was.
She was just kind of awkward, but she wasn't necessarily like a murderer.
Yeah. She's awkward and off, but not in a murder way, in just like an off way.
Unless that's what you want you to think.
Maybe. Yeah. So Kate said she would be back in 7 years in 1828.
Oh.
Richard only gave a brief description. Apparently at that point it was only Richard, Joel, and Lucy in the house. So the mom and the two youngest. By that point, all the other siblings had either moved out or died. And apparently it didn't disturb anyone else from the family who was still in the neighborhood.
So it did come back.
Yeah. And but it's again with like just the knocking and stuff like that. And Andrew Jackson allegedly saw her. I say allegedly.
Like President Andrew Jackson?
Yes. I say allegedly because this apparently happened in 1819. Also in 1819, Jackson was busy building his mansion house and being on trial for unauthorized invasions of the Seminoles in Florida.
He's like my least favorite president.
Yes. See above RE, unauthorized invasions on the Seminoles in Florida.
He was just a general like asshole.
Yeah.
Like, he did not give a shit about people.
Yeah. Like unauthorized invasions are the least of his problems.
Exactly.
And also according to Google Maps, it is a 14-hour walk from the Hermitage, which is his mansion house, to Adams, where Red River, the town, used to be.
Okay.
So conceivably he could have done it, especially if it was like summer.
Yeah.
Or I guess late fall, but like he had other things. He was about to like get nominated for a governorship and a bunch of other
What did
garbage.
he allegedly see?
Apparently, he was going to visit in 1819, and the wagon was stopped with the brakes, like the brakes on the wheels were put on, but it started right as they hit the Bell property line.
Oh.
And a couple of other smaller things, but like still in the same vein. But not.
The witch also didn't like him.
Yes. And this one time, I think the witch would have good taste.
No, you stay there. Okay, this is my property.
Yeah. That is the only point upon which I agree with her, because she has made some very distasteful comments about the enslaved people.
Oh, God.
But, yeah. But that's all I have.
Okay, let's go over this. So are there any other theories as to who she could have been other than Kate Batts and Richard Powell?
Not that I saw. There was the brief theory of the three middle kids doing ventriloquism of some sort.
That one. But that wouldn't explain the physical
noises.
stuff.
Yeah. I heard one video that pointed out, like, at a certain point, it's almost like a game of telephone. Well, I heard that Betsy got hit. Well, I heard her hair got pulled. I heard this, I heard this, I heard this, I heard this. And things just got blamed on the witch.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, things just expand and keep going and out of control.
I could believe that, especially considering it's kids, and kids love to amp things up.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And not to say that, like, we shouldn't trust the words of kids. Like, obviously, what's the saying? The
out of the mouths
of babes.
Yeah.
Like, that's...
Kids have a weird way of being super direct about certain stuff.
But I also think they're obviously a little older. They're not necessarily preschool age. They're, like, at an age where they know how to lie. They know how to embellish.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised even if they truly believed it, if they're maybe just like misremembering things, because I know I misremember things when I was in elementary school.
And like, especially because Richard Williams was writing doing the write-up in like the 1840s, so he was in his 30s at the time.
Yeah.
And like, I'm 28, and if you asked me like, what's your memory of this thing that happened in the first grade, I'd be like,
yeah.
yeah.
What do you think? Do you think it was something explainable, or do you think it was a witch or a ghost? Or...
I think that it is a combination of all of the above.
Okay.
Like, I think, for example, the Betsy situation, like the Betsy and Joshua Gardner, could have been Richard Powell, or at least exacerbated by Richard Powell. And I think all of these could have happened, but then were exacerbated by circumstances.
The only thing I can't figure out is how the heck was she just talking like while everybody was in the room?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Maybe it's, I'm just imagining it like a commentator, basically, like if God could talk to you while you were in the room or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a weird case. I also don't know if any of these people would actually want John Bell dead.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that I don't know if any of them had a grudge against John Bell or Betsy Bell, or particularly would have liked Lucy Bell all that much. But
I mean, maybe you guys can sound off in
comments below. I'll add a poll.
What do you think? Do you think it was jealous
jealous boyfriend, angry business person,
angry businesswoman, or an actual witch,
or kids being ventriloquists?
Yeah.
Or all of the above.
Or all of the above.
All right. So, with all of that said, join the Patreon. Patreon.com/DrearyMidnight.
Yes.
Follow us on Instagram @DrearyMidnightPod.
Also, yes.
If you have any suggestions or stories that you wanted to share, DrearyMidnightPodcast@gmail.com. And so with all of that said, don't haunt people.
Also, like, don't keep poison bottles in your cupboards.
Don't poison people in general.
Don't poison people. And just be nice.
Yeah. Don't be a dick.
And learn ventriloquism.
Don't be a dick with your ventriloquism.
All right. We got to stop giving people advice here.
Right. So I thought that said, safe travels home on this dreary midnights. Good night.
Good night.